then it's also very easy. All you have to do is hit Command N or go to File New, and you create a new Cocoa Touch class. And then you have to set it to be a subclass of UI Table View Cell. So it gets all the abilities and properties of a table view cell. And most importantly, you have to tick this part where it says also create a zip file. So let's just go ahead and call it new table view cell, and we create a new zip file, and we go ahead and click next. Then we create it inside our project folder, and we get two new files being created. One is the design file, the zip file, and this is where we can design how we want our custom cell to look. And the other one is the functionality. So what is the behavior of that cell? And we can specify it over here. And we can link up all of those outlets to this code file, and we'll be able to tap into it when we create a new object from it or a new copy of it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that, just move it to trash. And if we head back to our chat view controller, we can finish loading up these cells. So when we want to use a custom design, the first thing we have to do is we actually have to register the zip file. And we do that inside viewDidLoad. And in order to do that, we're going to write message table view dot register, and we're going to pick this one, register a nib for cell with reused identifier. So this registers a nib object, and nib is just an old word for zip. They're basically the same thing. So registers a design file that contains a cell with the table view under a specified identifier. And so if you go ahead and hit enter, then here you'll be able to specify the file that you want to register, and it's expecting a UI nib file. So we're going to construct a new UI nib file, and in order to create a new nib, you have to give it a nib name, and the name is of course what we called it over here, which is message cell, so you can ignore the zip part. So that's the name of our nib file, and then we're going to set the bundle as nil, so we're not going to specify a path to get there. We can get Xcode to search within the current project to find this message cell.zip file. And finally, we have to provide the reuse identifier of our cell, which, if you remember, is found in the attributes inspector, and we called it custom message cell. So I'm just going to copy and paste it directly in here. Okay, so that's complete. So after doing this a few times, this will just become routine, and it's just a few steps that you need to go through in order to have a custom cell for your table view. So step 1 was create the table view cell from row at index path method. Step 2 was create the cell using the dequeue reusable cell method, and step 3 was registering our message cell.zip file for use inside this current class. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to specify some text to display in our cells. So we're going to call it let message array equal, and we're going to create an array that's going to contain some text. So we're only going to have 3 items in our array. So now we can tap into this new cell that we created, and inside that cell we have a label called message body. So if you remember, have a look back at our custom message cell class. It has a bunch of outlets, and one of them is the message body, which is linked up to a label that's right in the middle of the cell. So we can tap into that by saying cell.messagebody.text equals message array, and the item from the message array that we're going to pick is going to be dependent on the row of the table view. So when this method gets called, it has a row that's associated with it. So at first, the table view is checking for the first item in the table view. So that index path.row property is going to be 0. So it's going to go into our message array and pick out the 0th item, i.e. first message, and populate the cell's message body with that text. And it does that for each cell in the table view. And the last thing that we need to do is to return the cell. So as you can see, this method expects an output in the form of a UI table view cell. So we've set up the cell, specifying the design as well as the class of the cell. We've set up the cell to have some message body text, And finally, we output that cell so that we can put it inside the table view. Now, this message gets called for every single cell that exists inside the table view. So naturally, we have to specify how many cells we want in our table view. And that is the next required method of the UI table view data source. The only obligatory things you have to do in order to set up a table view is specify how many cells you want and what cells you want to be displayed. So let's go ahead and complete the next required method, which is called number of rows in section. So go ahead and hit enter, and Xcode will type out all of that code for you. And in here, it's expecting an output. So it's expecting the number of cells that you want. So all we need to do is write return and then write the number of cells we want. Since we've only got 3 messages, it makes sense to have only 3 cells. Now, if we wanted to have sections in our table view, then we can also use the optional method number of sections in table view. And here we would specify return 2 for 2 sections or however many you want. But because we have a messaging app that doesn't really need sections, we're not going to put that method in there. So let's go ahead and run our app and see what it looks like right now. So let's go ahead and log in with some of the credentials that we registered with previously. So log in, and you can see that we've got 3 cells in our table view, but there's a bit of a problem. Why are all the cells so squished up? Well, let's try and figure this out. By default, all of our cells have a height of 44 points, and that is the standard cell. But we have a chat app, so if somebody writes a long message, we can't limit them to just 44 points height. They might want to write an essay. So in order to address this, we've actually put in some constraints inside this custom cell. And in order to activate those constraints, i.e. tell the table view to create the cell based on the size of the content. If this message label has a lot of content, then you should resize the cell to fit all of that content. And we can do that by writing a new method. So it's going to be called configure table view. And it's going to take no inputs, but it is going to have some functionality. And what we're going to do inside this method is we're going to set the message table view's row height property to UI table view automatic dimension. So essentially, it requests the table view use the default value for a given dimension. So in this case, it's the row height. And then we have to specify estimated height, and we're going to set it 120 points. So that should be enough for your average message. And the clever thing about this UI table view automatic dimension is that if your estimated height is not correct, then it'll actually resize and use the constraints instead. So we're going to trigger this configure table view as soon as the view gets loaded up. And so we're going to add it right at the bottom of our view did load here. So now if we run our app again, let's have a look at the layout of our table view. So there we go. UI table view automatic dimension has solved the problem for us. It's now making these cells as large as the content that's inside. So what happens if we make one of these messages really, really long? Let's see. I'm just going to type in a bunch of gibberish into that second item, and we're going to rerun the app and see what happens. So as you can see, our auto layout is working. We're making the cell as large as it needs to be in order to fit all of the content that's contained. So perfect. We've now set up our table view to be able to display custom cells, and we're able to get the cells to resize depending on the content that we give it. So we're one step closer to having our messaging app.